It's about history. It's about preservation. It's about sense of place here on Eastern Long Island. With Esperanza Leon, I'm Irwin Levy, and this is Our Hamptons. Esperanza.
Irwin, hello, my friend.
Okay, I was waiting for the greeting since we touched on that recently. That was a good one. That was a good one.
I'm just so excited about this. Actually, what we're going to talk about today. I don't know why. I can't tell you. It's just maybe it just connects with me somehow to my childhood again. You know, I'm just nostalgic.
I think that's part of it for sure, and also it touches on so many things. I'm going to ask Esperanza to say what it is too, because I'm going to say it but you're going to hear how beautifully Esperanza says it, rather than hearing it from my Queen's accent. The Hamptons Glitterati. Esperanza. Yeah, Esperanza.
The Hamptons Glitterati or the Literati?
Oh, both of them. I love the way you say
well,
both.
I think it went from literati to Glitterati.
That's probably the better description of that. It did go from one to the other because it really is the literati. And what we're going to talk about stems from an article from Vanity Fair. And this article goes back 10 years to August 2013. And I have to say, I love this writer, Michael Schneerson.
Who's done a lot of articles based on local topics, right?
He really has. We did an episode back a few months ago on the White Family Farm, which was a Michael Schneerson, and hopefully I'm pronouncing his name correctly, which was a Michael Schneerson article. And he does writes on obviously other topics as well, but the stuff he writes about Eastern Long Island for Vanity Fair, I love his work, Esperanza. And some of the things are a little off radar.
Exactly.
And he just really, again, evokes a certain time and place. And
exactly, yeah, it captures an essence that, you and I can relate to, and I'm sure many others can. Yeah,
completely true. And what this article was about from Michael Schneerson was really the rise of what he called the Sagg main set. In the 1960s. And essentially, Esperanza, I guess we're talking about the writers that were out here on Eastern Long Island, again, in the sweet spot we love to talk about, 50s, 60s, 70s, before we didn't trademark the term Hamptonization, Esperanza, but we tend to throw it around a little bit. It's a little bit before the Hamptonization of this. And we like to give the cast of characters, right, Esperanza?
Yes, let's do that.
We should really do that. So, again, Michael Schneerson is the author of this article we're using as our reference point. But these were, you talk about the glitterati, literary lions, whatever you want to talk about. This is a pretty powerful lineup of E.L. Doctorow, Robert Caro, Jason Epstein, Truman Capote, James Jones, George Plimpton, Kurt Vonnegut. But the real players in this article that are going to be touched on a lot is James Salter and Peter Matthiessen. And yes, there will be a backdrop, Esperanza, of Bobby Vance.
Yes,
something we touched on.
We've touched on, yeah.
And because that was the place.
That was the watering hole, right?
The watering hole. And that was the name of that episode we did about the watering holes on Eastern Long Island. So, Peter Matthiessen. Now, you read Men's Lives.
Yes. Finally. I should have read it many, many years ago, but I finally did.
Yeah. It came later than what we're talking about here, but
but the experiences were from earlier, right?
Yes.
Because Matthiessen had come out here, as you said, in the late 50s.
He bought. Okay, and this is, again, taking it from Michael Schneerson. He bought 6 acres in 1959. And again, we've spoken about Sagaponack in this era. This was a farming community. Small houses, not many houses, by the way, fields rolling down to the sea.
Yeah.
And, Mr. Schneerson writes how the early wave of New York City dwellers who came here were artists, musicians, and writers. And he adds how when they found these towns, again, this is something we've touched on. He implies before they were the Hamptons. And again, that's our sweet spot, the 50s and 60s. Esperanza, we spoke about this before we went on. Sort of mimics a little bit or parallels, whatever term you want to use, sort of the ABX movement, right?
Yeah, I mean, in many ways, right? They came out here, I think for this literary set, essentially it was a quiet place to work.
Right.
And then
right.
also in the summer, the beauty of just, being, it was like a retreat, both all seasons. And the living was cheap.
That's it.
That's the main thing.
and to your point, as Michael Schneerson writes in this article, how the rents were low, the houses were cheap. And Peter Matthiessen is quoted in this as saying, from Labor Day to Memorial Day, it was absolutely dead silent.
Right.
I loved it. I got a lot of work done, but it was very tough on our wives.
Yeah, no doubt. I imagine.
So,
people complain today, and I'm, in the off season, oh, there's nothing to do. I can't even imagine.
Exactly. And, and again, we've touched on this so many times about, and, even he'll bring it up later on in this article, how, yes, East Hampton, Southampton, we affectionately call the bookends, but everything in between was just very, very different and, inexpensive. He bought this, I'm sure in 1959, he bought these 6 acres for a song.
35,000, I think it was.
Yeah, something like that. Something like that. And, there'll be references.
Which was, a stretch for him, I'm sure, at that time, but as a writer, as an artist, but still, oh my gosh. 6 acres in Sagaponack, the most expensive zip code in
the country by now. Exactly. And, to take on this, there was apparently there was a couple out there that Michael Schneerson writes about named Arthur and Joan Stanton. I never heard of this name. Have you, Esperanza?
No, I can't. It doesn't ring a bell to me either. No.
Okay. Well, apparently, Mr. Stanton made a fortune importing Volkswagens.
Right.
So, okay, no problem. And Mrs. Stanton was an actress. But their East Hampton house became a literary salon, according to this, where they invited a lot of these writers over. And to your point about the prices, Mrs. Stanton is quoted as saying, why didn't we buy more land when the potato fields were $2,000 an acre?
Right. Yeah.
And we've touched on this so many times. We all have a story like that.
Yeah. Could have, should have, would have.
Completely true.
Yep.
But anyway, she goes on to say how money was not what it was all about. It was about, I love this quote.
This is, it's so true.
This was really sweet. This is Jane Stanton. It was about talent and achievement and ideas.
Yeah. Yeah. Inspiration, really. Yeah. Right.
I wish I said that. That is really.
We think that.
I know, but why didn't we say it?
We just don't express it as succinctly as she did.
Exactly. Now, so again, this article is from 2013. So they quoting, and I read this book, James Salter. He was 88 years old, and he published a book, I guess, when he was 88, called All That Is. Phenomenal book. Peter Matthiessen finished a book. E.L. Doctorow, who was 82 at the time. He wrote Ragtime, Billy Bathgate, amongst others. World's Fair, one book I loved. Robert Caro, Pulitzer Prize winner, wrote about Robert Moses, someone we've touched on. I think he won the Pulitzer for that, The Power Broker.
Power Broker.
Yeah. Like 1,400 pages of small print.
Yeah,
and incredibly, let me just digress, because we digress on our Hamptons. Incredibly not available on a Kindle. You can't get this book in electronic form.
So you're getting a workout at the same time as you read.
I could read, and I've actually started this book a number of times, except it's so heavy I could barely lift it. But like the perfect book to read on a Kindle, not available on a Kindle.
Oh,
but
that's hilarious.
Crazy stuff. But anyway, Salter and Matthiessen had this, this special bond, and Here's what, just going back to what we're talking about, the bookends of East Hampton and Southampton, and this is Michael Schneerson's words now. To call this a Hamptons group isn't quite right, for none of these literary lions reside in the high hedge villages of Southampton and East Hampton.
Right, like you said, not in the quote unquote bookends, but the spaces in between, which I love.
Exactly.
The unexplored is like the frontier, you know.
If we were a more polished podcast, I could bring in the Dave Matthews song "The Space Between" and have that play right now. But you know, we haven't reached that point in our Hamptons. The space between. No, I won't do that to our audience. But good song though. And he also talks about how, you know, the Sagg main set, which is, I guess, a term I don't know if he named it, if this is Michael Schneerson's words or this group informally called themselves that. You know, part of the reason was for the road that cuts south from Sagaponack and it goes directly to Sag Harbor.
Right.
And he touches on, you know, Steinbeck, who bought a house in Sag Harbor. And
well, it was I think, the first one who came out here as far as a literary giant, right?
Yeah, he was, as Schneerson says, he was a generation older than the Sagg main set. But yeah, he was really, well, not part of this informal club. I think he did his drinking at the Baron's Cove Inn, by the way.
Yes, exactly. Another watering hole.
Exactly. Not so much at Bobby Van's, but the editor at Simon Schuster at the time, Alice Mayhew, was quoted here as, I like this quote also: "The town was scruffy and cheap, and editors in those days, when publishing was a gentleman's business, had even less money than the writers." You know, so, and you mentioned, you know, Peter Matthiessen did pay $35,000 for that compound in Sagaponack. I think it's owned by Peconic Land Trust now.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, I mean, and I, you know, as we veer off a little bit, that it is, you know, Peter Matthiessen has passed on, but it is, you know, they are they're establishing a center, and it's an artist writers retreat, and it's
exactly really staying.
I don't think it's the full 6 acres any longer, but it's still on Bridge Lane,
right? And
beautiful spot in the area.
Beautiful location. I mean, fantastic location. It's a location I'd love to imagine in 1959, right?
Oh gosh. Well,
what that must have been like.
You know, of all these, you know, literary giants, and we've talked about this before, that John Irving novel of A Widow for a Year captures that to me. I mean, all of these probably could have captured it, but it just that area is captured so beautifully in that book.
Yeah, no question. I haven't read that book yet, but I know you're doing a good lobbying job of doing it. I really have to, you know.
And I'm going to read the Salter book.
Yeah, no. I was telling Esperanza. I mean, I remember I keep a list on Goodreads about the books I read and I review it and whatnot. I remember loving this book. So help me, I have a hard time telling you what it was about.
But it left an impression. Just as these writers left an impression on this area, right?
Completely true. I mean, they definitely did. And it's, again, and Esperanza, this is a theme we've touched on so often here on our Hamptons, how the atmosphere, the vibe, for the artists, I know it was the light. Maybe for the writers, it was the quiet, as you mentioned earlier. But this place just draws you, and especially when we talk about these times that we love to talk about before, you know, the negative things that we sort of see going on here now. They recognized, how's this line? This place had the special sauce.
Oh gosh, total right? Flavor Town. Yeah.
Flavor Town.
I borrow that from my nephews.
Okay. Can we steal that? I like that.
You like that?
That really is, you know, so Salter and his wife, you know, came out here in the 60s, more in East Hampton and Amagansett. They were a little bit away from the fray, if you will, of the Sagg main set. But, you know, Salter actually, we're not a literary podcast, but we're going to just touch on this, how he actually turned to film writing, according to Michael Schneerson, unsure that he would even be able to support his family as a writer, but ultimately, you know, he did.
Well, I think that was partly, or according to Schneerson, was that book that you mentioned to me that, you know, We're not prudes, but apparently it was quite the novel, a sport and a pastime that perhaps, made him feel a little bit like uncertain that his writing career as far as fiction was going to continue.
And again, we're not a literary podcast, and I'm certainly not a book reviewer, but I'm telling you, I read this book, and and again,
did you blush? Did you blush?
I was alone reading it, and I was blushing. I mean, I'm telling you, it was really said to Esperanza.
You're blushing now.
She sees that on Zoom, ladies and gentlemen. I think I am, but I remember reading this. I was just like, I mean, if I wrote this with my name on it, I swear the FBI would be at the house. I mean, it was really for its day, pretty provocative. But anyway, now that we're in we're getting into the 1970s at this point. We touched on Bobby Vans previously, but I got to just interject because Michael Schneerson mentioned Bobby Vans, and again. Opened it in the mid 70s. It wasn't there long, but this was the writer's place. And again, this was something we touched on. It was Truman Capote, James Jones, John Knowles, A Separate Piece, another amazing novel.
What was the drink that Capote would?
The orange thingy.
I love that. I just love that. Which was like a whole glass of vodka with a splash of orange juice, right?
Exactly. And I have to. I got to add in this story because, again, it's so evocative of a time and place. It's a story relayed in this article how one night, Willie Morris, he was the editor of Harper's. He was another member of this crowd. I remember, ladies and gentlemen, we're here in the
ex-editor, right?
Ex-editor, yes. Yeah, exactly. Now we're in the we're in the 1970s here. But just imagine 1970s off-season Bridgehampton. He got so drunk, Esperanza, that he passed out on the double yellow line of Main Street and stayed there for several hours, undisturbed by the occasional passing car.
Incredible. I love it. And I was thinking, I said at the beginning of this that, this makes me think of my childhood. And I want to just put the disclaimer out. My childhood was not alcohol infused, just I was not surrounded by this, but I do think that I remember, we were neighbors with Clifford Irving for a few years. And, and I remember, being with his children, and I just remember these, backyard barbecues, going to the beach. And this is what is described here as, straying away from the Bobby Vans and the watering holes, just a simple, gathering in the backyard, having a barbecue, playing football.
Exactly. Something,
conversation.
Something you've brought up many a time in our Hamptons, when you refer to Hamptons Bohemia, same kind of element.
Exactly.
Yes. And again, not to veer, but we veer on our Hamptons. We can't help it. It was a time when properties weren't gated and screened in, and 30-foot arborvitae's
backyard.
It was just.
I swam in everybody's pool.
Exactly. It was just.
The liability.
That was another John Cheever, the swimmer. That was a great short. Look at the way. Hey, maybe we are a literary podcast, but that short story by John Cheever, was all about how a guy went from one neighbor's house to the other swimming through the suburbs. Yes. Very funny story, but it's really, God, we are expanding our. Esperanza, what's that word again? In what we're talking about here, we're getting into this literary thing, but you can't help it. Now, Esperanza, one of the later arrivals, we touched on him earlier in this episode, Robert Caro. I hope I'm pronouncing that right.
I don't know. Is it Caro?
I actually met him at one of the authors' nights at East Hampton. One year, but again, The Power Broker, 1975 Pulitzer winner.
On my list, yeah.
On the list, heaviest book ever printed, but maybe next to the Bible. But this is just a really cool story. Again, talking about 1970s Hamptons. And this is Robert Caro. This is his quoted in this story. He grandly told his wife, Ina, go buy a house in the Hamptons.
Oh, yeah, because he sold a story or
he
book rather. Oh yeah, his first book
right,
on
and the Power
Lyndon B.
Broker,
Johnson.
and so
Right.
he was, and he arranged for a real estate agent to show her houses on a street she'd liked.
I wish I knew who that was. Was it Condy Lamb? Was
Yeah,
it?
exactly. Yeah. Tina Fredericks,
Yeah.
Alan M. Schneider. Exactly. That was a prior episode of our Hamptons, folks. But anyway, and the street she liked, Lily Pond Lane in East Hampton.
Well,
hashtag as good as it gets.
Yeah, good taste.
It had good taste. But the story goes on. It's very cute. The agent had a big ring of keys and said, "How much do you have to spend?" And Ina said proudly, now remember, folks, we're in the mid-70s, $50,000. According to Michael Schneerson's story, the agent made a U-turn, dropped all the keys at her office, and took Ina to the Springs.
Yeah, just took one key that went down to the Springs with Ina.
Exactly.
Here you go.
And now I live in Springs and I love Springs, but who's kidding who? Springs ain't Lily Pond Lane. We know this.
Absolutely. I mean, David's Lane at that time was $150,000. So
exactly. And again, million stories out there. But there the Cairo settled, and when they could, though, they did move to Sag Harbor proper. So anyway, that's the story with that. But again, Esperanza, to your point, the writers and editors, it was all about the beach barbecues, the parlor games, drinking. And one quote here by, I don't know what Loomis's first name was.
Bob Loomis.
Bob Loomis, thank you.
Yeah, he was another editor.
Right. You can't think of any other town in which that happens quite that way.
It's so true. I mean, I say this all the time, and even though it's not quite like this is the reason why I love where I live, is the people that gather at time. It's just there's a motivation, that comes out of a lot of the gatherings that I attend, with conversations and the type of people that come together in this community. It's incredible. It continues to happen.
For sure. I mean, again, it was just, and we've touched, look, this is something we've certainly touched on so often in the past, but this place, these kind of conversations and dialogues, we talked about how we'd love to have been a fly on the wall at Bobby Van's, I just don't see them happening in suburbs in Westchester or Nassau County. Right. I mean, maybe that's not fair to say.
But what is the spirit of this place that attracts this, that makes this happen? Right? It's a question.
It's not only our question. It's like our mission.
Yes,
it's our mission of our Hamptons.
Yeah.
This is the mission. What is the sense? Here we go again, going a little off outline, but Esperanza, what is it? This is like the age-old question we're never going to answer, I don't think. What is it about this place where these kind of people, the brain power, the creativity, attracts them? And again, yes, the artist, the light, the quiet, but it's just, is it fair to say it's almost an intangible that we can't even put our finger on?
Yeah, I really can't. I mean, I know the place is beautiful. I know that it was, back then just like a paradise. It's still, there are spots of paradise still to this day, obviously, but it just, what is it that is it the proximity to New York, to Manhattan? It's hard to really put one's finger on it, because like you said, this isn't happening in Westchester.
I just, and I'm not saying that in a bad way.
Right, it's not in this quantity and quality.
That's the point.
Because it makes me think of, we've had the episode on Elizabeth Barlow Rogers, and in her early days, and by the way, she wrote her book with Jason Epstein, who's one of the editors that's mentioned in this article, East Hampton, East Hampton, a history. I know that what Schneerson describes here in this article also happened at her house, that you'd have Matthiessen and Peter Jennings and all these people coming to their backyard and playing touch football. I mean, that's what happened on weekends at their home as well. And that's what I love. I'm nostalgic about that somehow.
True. And, it even goes on, he brings out in this article how Alice Mayhew, one of the editors, how not just did you have this crowd, it then evolved into even more authors. Carl Bernstein, Walter Isaacson, Richard Reeves, Linda Bird Franke, just really extraordinary. And again,
mostly men, I will note.
Yeah, okay, true. Although a couple of the editors were women. Yeah, I mean, yeah, but
thankfully, yeah.
But and Esperanza, like he brings out in this point how they like to work off the food and booze and writing with sports. And here you go. You just touched on this earlier. Touch football on Peter Mathiessen's field, was as hard played as the Kennedy games at Hyannis,
right, yeah.
Just, and,
and the tennis matches, right? Didn't he mention something
exactly,
about the Stantons? The Stantons were the only ones with a tennis court and a swimming pool, something like that.
That's right. That's right. And
they had the amenities.
I was waiting for that.
I had to
about 25 minutes in, but I knew it was coming. I really, we didn't have to push for it. It was just going to happen organically. But yeah, and again, there were other cast of characters here. George Plimpton. I mean, you want to, like he wrote a book, The Literary Lion. I mean, Peter Jennings. We had the magazine editor Terry McDonald. John Irving was here for a while. I mean, these people were all involved, and yes, he does touch on the Matthiessen-Salter hard tennis matches. It's very funny stuff. And they did remain close. For a long time.
Throughout their careers, right?
Yeah, throughout their careers, although they claim to have never really read any of each other's books, despite the fact
they maybe in secret they read them, but they didn't comment to each other about them, right?
I almost got the impression that Michael Schneerson was like sort of implying that writers have thin skins in a sense, like
artists do.
Yeah,
it's just
given,
I think.
But he also, to bring a background here, and we've talked about this, Matthiessen was a highborn wasp with a social pedigree, grew up in the same Fifth Avenue building as Plimpton, went to private schools with Plimpton, and
which is interesting, right? I should just want to interject that it's so interesting that these are people that came from, Matthiessen from old money, which is rather the crowd out here, right?
Yeah.
So it's interesting that, but he scraped together his own existence. So that's
apparently, because obviously if he had that pedigree, unless they were pedigree rich and cash poor. I don't know the family history.
I don't think so.
But the point was, he grew up a certain way, summered on Fisher's Island. Mm-hmm. I mean, that was pretty exclusive we're talking about, moved here in 59. So that's when he was a kid, 30s, 40s, whatever, to summer in a place like that. But, and, Salter too, grew up in, on the Upper East Side. So went to Horace Mann. So these people were not poor. But interestingly, Esperanza, Peter Matthiessen ended up not in those bookend villages and ended up, as work, really getting involved with the storyline of men's lives, attracted to that Bayman life. Actually, when it acted as a Bayman, wasn't.
Oh yeah, he was hallucinating. Yeah.
I don't think that was necessarily research. He was just all in with that life for a period of time.
Yeah.
It's really, but again, the friendship, as Schneerson describes, it did outweigh the rivalry. And, and just listening to these stories that he brings out, Esperanza, the two of them met every day. Go back to this era, okay? I'm pausing and smiling because I'm imagining this right now, okay? These two really star writers of their day meeting every day around 6 o'clock at Gibson Beach. That. Could you imagine? How about some dead air? And let me just close my eyes and imagine this.
Well, I was imagining it because I used to do the same thing. And then I started imagining how nowadays you go down at 6 o'clock and the beach is just populated with catered events.
I know, right.
So
Right.
not much peace involved
No,
going down at 6 o'clock for
I
a
don't,
quiet swim.
yeah, where Salter's wife Kay would be waiting for them with big towels and martinis.
Oh yeah, because they
When
took
they
that
got off
dip
the,
in
could you,
November.
yeah,
That
and
last
that was,
dip in November. Yeah.
they apparently they used to stop swimming at Labor Day, but they went every year November 1st. I mean, I got, this is
Yeah.
really,
Why would you stop swimming in Labor Day? I mean, really, September is the best time to go swimming.
it's completely the best time. And what's interesting, why would you stop on Labor Day and then decide to resume November 1? How about saying, okay, let's go to the
Well,
end of September?
that was their polar bear plunge.
Exactly. But except these were writers. They didn't call it a polar.
It wasn't an event. This is what I wanted to get at. It was just a thing you do.
But I mean, Esperanza, they had to be writers just to term it the farewell to all swim.
God, that's great.
Poetry.
Yeah.
That is poetry. Somehow, if I went down to the ocean and swam at 6 o'clock and said that, it wouldn't have the same cachet. But when Salter and Matthiessen are saying it, man, that is really sweet. And this is probably as good a place to start wrapping up as any, because how do we really? I don't think I can evoke anything better than to start wrapping up this episode with imagining these two writers, November 1st, every year, like clockwork, a ritual of just saying, going down to that ocean and swimming. And I guess probably, I'm going to take poetic license here, Esperanza, reflecting on, the beauty, the sense of place, the inspiration of this place.
Yeah.
That had to aid and abet their creativity.
No doubt. Yeah. Unparalleled, I would say. Yeah.
I mean, they just, and remember, these were New Yorkers. I mean, and they came out here when this place was the real country, and just, Matthiessen said it earlier. We touched on it earlier in this episode. The silence, he did, some of his best work here. And to your point, studied the artists, Pollock, Krasner, without the distractions of the New York life. Some of their best work was done here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Esperanza, in a perfect world, I'd be able to say to you right now, great episode. You want to meet me at Bobby Van's for a drink? But I guess being as it's 9:45 in the morning, first of all, that probably would
probably not a good idea.
Not my usual.
Maybe back then we could have done it.
I mean,
actually, no doubt back then we could have done it.
Capote was waiting for Bobby Van to open the door every day. So for sure.
Before noon, right? Yeah.
But
so funny.
This was really fun.
Very much fun. And I just, one little thing before we end, I mentioned the Peter Matthiessen Center, and I would encourage people to look it up online, but we also can mention, you mentioned Steinbeck, and that property was recently purchased and is going to become also an artist, a writer's retreat or residency. Right. Truman Capote's place in Sagaponack, unfortunately, right. After it was Ross Bleckner's place, is right. Now again in other hands. And I don't know if it's, being demolished or what the intention is with that. But I think part of what I'm saying is these people made such an impact that I'm grateful that there are places like the Matthiessen Center and now Steinbeck that, that will be also a place for artists to continue their work and be inspired. And then unfortunately, just the way things are going these days, that some place like Truman Capote's and right. maybe many others that have been just lost to demolition because people don't care.
No, exactly. And it's a great point to bring out, a great way to, close this episode out. I mean, often do you think it's fair to say the artists have gotten more play here, for lack of a better term, than the writers? Because I guess, for one thing, an actual movement literally started here, but
right. But you've got like Madhu with Bob Dash, right?
Yeah,
Which is close to the Matthiessen. You've got Longhouse. You have the Paula Krasner house. Yes, I guess you could say that, but it's their time now. These literary lines,
exactly, and
right?
It is wonderful that the Matthiessen property is being saved, and the Steinbeck as well, because the point of the story is there is a literary history here, a rich one.
Strong. Oh,
I mean, a just tremendous one. So, wow, great stuff. Esperanza, always a pleasure.
Yes.
And until next time.
Until next time.
Thanks so much for joining us. New episodes of Our Hamptons are released every other Tuesday. Find them wherever you get your podcasts.